I'm so excited to introduce you to the best website designers out there. We have a brand new partnership with Session Sites. It is where good therapy meets brilliant design, and they get your website switched over or built in less than 2 weeks. They fine tune your messaging, use science backed user experience methodology, and work exclusively with mental health professionals. In fact, new clients right now are going to get 3 free therapy marketing strategy calls with their creative director of Session Sites if you book today. You're not going to want to miss this. Head on over to sessionsites.com/Joe. Again, that's sessionsites.com/Joe. Get the website of your dreams today. Sessionsites.com/Joe. This is the Practice of the Practice podcast with Joe Sanok, session number 1146. I'm Joe Sanok, your host, and welcome to the Practice of the Practice podcast. This 7-part series that kicked off back in episode 1141, our consultant Ash has been putting this together, talking about selling a practice, all that goes into it, all those things you need to think about. Today she's going to be talking to a friend of hers about her journey. And in our final session on the 31st, we'll be talking about envisioning your ideal practice sale. So an awesome series. Make sure you listen to the entire 7-part series that kicked off back in 1141. Here we go.
Welcome back to another exciting episode of the Practice of the Practice podcast. I'm your guest host, Ashley Mielke, and I'm really excited about our episode today. This is part 6 of our 7-part series on how to sell a group practice. So all of the previous episodes have been focused on my journey of selling my group practice and really supporting you and preparing you when you're ready to exit your business, whether that's in the next couple of years or even 10 years down the road. But today you are in for a treat. I know I've been talking about this the last couple of episodes. We have a very exciting guest on the podcast today. This incredible woman, Dr. Jennie Ward, is not only a colleague of mine, but a friend and someone who personally inspired me on my journey of selling my group practice. So she is going to be sharing just a wealth of knowledge and experience and insight to support you on your journey by sharing her story of selling her group practice in 2023. So before we dive in, and we welcome Jennie to the podcast, I'm just going to share a bit of her bio, and then we will dive right in. As the former owner of a successful group psychology practice in Alberta, Canada, Dr. Jennie Ward brings a wealth of real-world business expertise to her role as a mentor and advisor. Over the course of her 8-year ownership, she navigated the challenges of scaling and optimizing the practice, which ultimately led to a profitable sale in 2023. Now, Dr. Ward shares the strategies and insights she gained through that process with other psychology group practice owners in Canada. Through her practice potential methodology, she guides and supports practice owners through the complex journey of selling their practices. She also runs a mastermind group, Impeccable, for psychology leaders in Canada who desire to accelerate their business growth along a curated group of peers in the industry. In addition to her work supporting psychology practice owners, Dr. Ward works as a leadership mentor and spiritual guide, known for her ability to combine ancient wisdom with practical, modern business strategies to help leaders enhance their impact. And we are going to share at the end of this episode how you can connect with Jennie Ward and how you can follow her on socials. So thank you so much for being here today, Jennie.
Oh, what a wonderful introduction, Ashley. I'm so happy to be here.
Thank you. So I've got about a million questions for you because there's so much to unpack in the next 30 minutes. So we're just going to dive right in. So I thought a natural place for us to start, Jennie, to help our listeners understand a bit about your journey is to start at the beginning. So can you start by sharing how you got started with your practice, what your early goals were, and what specialties or unique services you focused on.
Sure, absolutely. So I'll rewind a little bit and go back to graduate school. And when I did my PhD in clinical psychology here in Canada. And during my graduate training, I had planned on focusing on chronic health conditions. That was my goal. And so when I was finishing my residency and, was getting ready to graduate, I was working in an eating disorder program here in Alberta. And it was, this beautiful multidisciplinary clinic, and it had all of these wonderful people working there. I really, really enjoyed it. And they had a job opportunity when I was graduating. And it was just a natural fit. Everything made sense for me to stay there. And at the same time, I had seen this job opportunity with the Canadian military. And for some reason, this opportunity was really enticing me, and it really didn't make a lot of sense. It didn't really align with where I'd been planning to go in my career. But I just felt like I have to apply for this. And I applied, and I got offers at both. And what I ended up doing was going to work at the military clinic. So I worked for 5 years for the Canadian Armed Forces as a contract psychologist. And the reason why I'm bringing this story up is, well, number one, it was really my intuition that took me in that direction. And, I'm definitely a very intuitively guided person, which I'm sure your listeners will find out as we continue with this interview. I discovered that I had this passion for first responders and trauma and PTSD treatment. And when I started working at the military clinic, it was during the height of the Canadian involvement in the war in Afghanistan. So it was a very intense time. I absolutely loved it. And when I left that clinic and started my group practice, I went directly into a group practice ownership. I knew that was my long-term vision. And so I incorporated right away, and I called my practice Ward and Associates, but there were no associates at the beginning. It was just Ward. And that was the beginning of just a beautiful specialty area of first responder PTSD treatment.
Wow. Well, thank you for sharing the background of your story, Jennie. Can you let us know how did you go from working for the military, specializing in trauma, to then deciding, you know what, I'm actually going to branch out and start my own practice?
I'm a very business-oriented entrepreneurial person. And so I knew from the beginning of graduate school that ultimately I wanted to own my own practice. And that was something that I had in mind, and I knew I was working toward no matter what. But when I graduated from graduate school, it was pretty uncommon to go directly into private practice. It was more common to work at a clinic where, you had colleagues around and you developed your skills a little further. So that was kind of the reason why I decided to go that route. And I think that was helpful for me at the time. But ultimately, I knew I wanted to run my own practice from the get-go.
I love that. That's amazing. And so there you are building and scaling up your practice. And then how far into your journey did you start to think about selling? Like, tell us a little bit about that, and also the size of your practice at that time.
So the size of my practice, I believe there were 10 clinicians at the time. I had 2 admin people working for me. So that was the size of the business. The decision to sell was an interesting one. So I did not plan on selling at all. And really when I made the decision to begin pursuing the sale, there were a few things that were happening in my life that led to that. I had been enjoying working for the practice for so long, and I really loved the business side, optimizing systems, and the practice was thriving. I hadn't had a person leave the practice for 4 years by the time I sold the practice. We had a really good culture. I was very hands-off with my admin. But I was finding that it was a bit more of a grind in some ways, just the shift in group practice ownership. There were a lot more clinics opening. There were a lot more practitioners going into private practice. It was harder to recruit therapists, and it was just a bit of a challenge. It was not insurmountable by any means, but I was noticing that it was becoming a little bit harder, and so it was taking a bit more of my energy. And also at the same time, I was becoming deeply immersed in some of the other work that I do, which is more spiritual and energetic in nature. And I was apprenticing with a shaman, and I had been doing that for a number of years. And I was developing a new business, and I had incorporated a new business, the one that I'm working out of now, which is called the Wisdom Portal. And I was beginning to offer my signature methodology, the mastery paradigm, which is helping leaders to heal and grow and evolve using spiritual and energetic and intuitive methodologies. So I was really being drawn in that direction. And so I was in mentorship with one of my mentors one day, and I was telling her about, just kind of the struggle between running the group practice and, all the things I had to do there and my new work in the Wisdom Portal. And, I was talking to her about how I wanted to maybe hire more of a leadership team in the practice. And she said, Jennie, have you ever thought about selling your group practice? And I was, taken aback. I had not been thinking about that. And I said, no, absolutely not. That is not in my plan. That's not where I was going to go. But of course, that was just my initial response. And I said, really, I hadn't been thinking about that, but I will give it some thought. So I took a couple of weeks to contemplate it. And I realized, that seemed like a really great option for me at that point in my life. So I decided to go for it.
Wow, that is really incredible, Jennie. And thank you for sharing a bit about how there was a bit of that kind of, what am I trying to say? Like overlapping of the group practice ownership and running your successful business, but also starting your new company, the Wisdom Portal. And so it sounds like sort of a seamless transition for you in terms of what next steps would look like. So, okay. So then you decide, you know what, this is actually going to be the right decision for me. What's the next step that you take in early in that process?
Yeah, so then I discovered, okay, I have no idea how to do this. So
Right?
I had to start doing some research and, figuring it out. I can be pretty scrappy, so I just buckled down and was like, okay, I'm going to figure out how to sell a business. And Ashley, my husband, Brian, he is a corporate commercial lawyer, and, he's done all of my legal work for my group practice and for the sale. And so I had decided, okay, I figured out, kind of the logistics of just the basics of how you sell a company. And then I decided, okay, I need to tell Brian that this is where I'm at. This is really early on.
Mm-hmm.
And so he and I touched base, and I had a conversation with him, and I was actually going to just ask him for a referral to another lawyer because I actually didn't realize that he did sales of businesses, because everything that he does is confidential, everything that I do is confidential. So it was kind of funny. I said, Brian, do you know anyone who I could speak to about a sale of a business? And he's like, well, I do that almost every day, so so that was kind of funny. I'm like, okay, apparently I should ask you more questions about what you're doing day to day. So he was extremely helpful in just, all of the logistics and what I needed to do in order to set up my practice to sell and to take all of the steps that I needed to take.
That is amazing. And by the way, I think I talked about Brian in previous episodes. He's just an amazing lawyer, and I felt so grateful for the opportunity to have his support in the sale of my business as well. So big shout out to Brian.
Yes.
Okay, so you're going to start this process. You've got Brian's support. You're ready to take those steps. Tell us about, were there challenges or obstacles that you faced? What did those next steps look like in terms of just even finding a buyer?
Yeah. So, One of the biggest obstacles that I had at the beginning, and I don't know if you experienced this as well, but I didn't know anyone who had done this sort of process in Canada. And, I was pretty tapped into the group practice world, and I kept having these thoughts of, if this was a thing, I feel like more people would do it. So I had kind of this, sort of a negative attitude, to be honest, about like, I don't know if this is even possible because no one does this in Canada. And I wasn't sure if it was because we have mostly contractor models here, as opposed to in the States, there is more of a tendency to have W-2 employee-based models. And so I knew that that would be more of a challenging selling feature. So that was, I had a real mindset block there about, I just don't know if this is going to work. But what I decided to do was I'm just going to keep plugging away and do what I need to do in order to make this happen. And if I hit a wall that I just can't get past, well, I guess that will be the end of it. But, I'll just keep trying and see where it takes me. And, that attitude seemed to work. And I was able to have a wonderful experience with the sale.
It's amazing. I love that. And it's so true. When we don't have any reference point on what steps to take, that can feel like a bit of a challenge or an obstacle. So thank you for sharing that. So then how did you secure your buyer? Like if for the listeners on this episode, if they're going to consider where they would potentially find someone interested. I did talk about this in a previous episode, different avenues to consider, but tell us about your journey.
Yes. So, when it comes to finding a buyer, it's really interesting because everything is so confidential that it's not, a matter of just putting word out there like, hey, I'm selling, because, that can cause a lot of disruption within your business if your staff know that you're selling. So it's all kind of very quiet and underground. So that makes it even more challenging. So I tried a few different routes. The whole process was, just a learning experience. And so I did a few different things. I first reached out to someone that I knew who I thought would be interested in buying. She's a wonderful person. I trust her business, savvy. She's like a great therapist. I thought she'd be a wonderful choice. And so she and I were in talks for probably a good month, and she was trying to make it work, but for a number of reasons, she just couldn't make it happen. So that was disappointing, but I had to kind of go back to the drawing board. And what I ended up doing was I decided to post anonymously in some Facebook groups where I just reached out and said, I'm looking to sell. And I gave like some very vague, like no one would know it was me, but, just some generic comments around the practice and, the success of the practice. And then I set up a confidential email account. So it was like group practice sale at Canada, .com. It was just some anonymous email. And so people could reach out to me there. And then when they reached out to me, I would have them sign an NDA, a non-disclosure agreement. And then we were able to speak after that and speak more openly after they had signed the NDA. So that was ultimately how I found my buyer.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing. So you find your buyer and now you have to prepare your practice for sale. What did that look like financially and operationally, and just even thinking about staff retention and those really key parts of your business?
Right. So, as it's probably clear now, I was not planning on doing this. So it was very, from the time I had that discussion with my mentor until, when I started taking steps to selling, that was like 2 weeks. So, I tend to be pretty, I'm a fast action taker. So I really didn't do much when it came to changing my systems and processes. But I was fortunate that my business was already set up really well. I love the business side of things. So I had really good SOPs or standard operating procedures. I had great admin support. My financials were in good shape. So when I decided to sell, my business was really ready for it. But I do, for your listeners who are thinking about setting their practice up to sell, buyers definitely want a turnkey experience and they want to be able to step in and just take over. They want those SOPs. They want great documentation. They want evidence that you've been tracking KPIs or key performance indicators. They want multiple referral sources that are flowing well. They want excellent profit margins. So, those are the areas that you want to focus on if you're wanting to kind of prepare your practice for a sale.
I love that. Such great advice. What was the most unexpected part of the selling process for you?
For me, I think I expected it to be pretty smooth, which is naive of me now that I look back. and
Yes.
and I expected it to be, I'm pretty chill. I'm not a really like stressed out person all the time, but it was really, really stressful. And so I was not expecting it to be as stressful as it was. And, there's a few reasons for that. One is, you're doing all of your regular work, so I was still running the group practice. I was still starting the wisdom portal and building that up. Plus you're doing the work of selling, which is, that is a job in itself. There's a lot that goes into that whole process. There's a lot of information to provide during the due diligence part of the sale. If you're not organized, you'll find out right away. I was fairly organized, but it's still, there were things that weren't, in the places I hoped they would be in. And, when I had decided to sell, it was because I was having a little bit of a difficult time balancing everything that I had going on. So the sale itself actually made that worse temporarily before that got better. So that was pretty unexpected. The other thing that comes to mind is that I really struggled with the confidentiality of this sale, in that, of course, as a psychologist, I'm used to things being confidential and, I'm like a vault, as I'm sure almost all of us are. But the idea of having this huge thing happening in my life and not being able to talk to very many people about it, you have your advisors and that's about it. Thankfully, I had my husband, so he was very involved. I found that very stressful. And I almost felt as if I was lying to people. They would ask me, oh, what's new? How's your business going? And I'd, oh, it's fine. Yeah. And I didn't want to talk any further because it felt like I was lying. So I hadn't really thought about how difficult that would be, but I found it challenging. I don't know if you felt the same way.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. That was by far the hardest part for me too.
Yeah.
Was feeling like I was being dishonest. And
Yeah.
you have to almost separate that emotional part and recognize that this is a part of what it entails.
Yeah. It's a
And
business transaction and the confidentiality is really important. Yeah.
yes.
I am so excited about Alma. When I had my private practice, I struggled building my caseload, attracting the right clients, managing the business side. And honestly, one of the reasons I didn't take insurance was it was so difficult to navigate. So many of my consulting clients deal with these problems as well. And Alma supports clinicians in building rewarding private practices with simplified insurance credentialing in under 45 days, enhanced reimbursement rates, and guaranteed 2-week payback, plus a free profile in their searchable, filterable directory, making it easy for clients who are the right fit for your practice to find you. Learn more about how Alma could support your private practice at helloalma.com/Joe. That's hello, ALMA.com/Joe to learn more.
Can you share a key lesson or takeaway from the negotiation stage of the sale of your business, Jennie?
Absolutely. So one of the things that my husband had emphasized to me was that everything is negotiable, because I was often saying to him, oh, I don't know if they'll agree to that, or I don't know if that's going to work. And so he really encouraged me to give some thought to what are my non-negotiables. And for me, the main one was I wanted a full cash deal, and I wanted the cash in hand in the day of the sale. So that was my non-negotiable, and pretty much everything else I was pretty flexible on. I had other preferences, but I wasn't as concerned about those. So that really helped me to stay focused on, okay, what's the most important thing, and how are we going to make this happen?
Amazing. And tell us so we can understand your thought process. Why was that important to you? Like that non-negotiable. I want to have the cash, just one lump sum payment in hand on the closing day.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it was probably because I had a bit of concern that, let's say something happened to the practice, or, I just know that things can go on where, let's say their circumstances change and then they tell me, okay, I'm not going to pay you. And I didn't want to be in that position. I wanted to be able to make sure that I was receiving the amount that I wanted to receive for the sale. And I thought that it was more risky if I was having, installments, or, the different types of payment methods that are out there. I just didn't want that. So, yeah, it was just probably a little bit of an anxiety-based thing, and a concern that maybe it wouldn't, all come to fruition if I had to wait.
Okay, that makes total sense. Thank you for sharing. Now, that brings forth another question for me. How did you price the sale of your business? Like, how did you come up with the number that you wanted?
Right. So in the very beginning stages, I researched, okay, how do you price a business? And came, the EBITDA determination was,
Mhm.
the main recommendation for determining that. So I calculated my own EBITDA, and I had an accountant as well. So, but I wanted to have just kind of a general ballpark idea of
Mhm.
what was my company worth. So I calculated my EBITDA. I came up with what I thought was a reasonable number for the practice. And it was probably, you can have different multiples with the EBITDA number. And
Mhm.
I went with a bit of a lower multiple because I wanted the cash deal. And then I went to my husband, my lawyer, and also to my accountant, and spoke to them about, this is the number that I had in mind. How does this look based on all of my financials? Because they had all my P&Ls and all of that. And my accountant was like, you know what, this seems spot on. This is what I would recommend, absolutely. And that was actually the number that I got. So yeah, I came up with it myself based on my own EBITDA calculation, but I made sure that it was reasonable with the professionals, and yeah, that was the price that I ended up getting.
That is amazing. Like,
Yeah,
I am so happy for you, Jenny. Like, that is really incredible. Like you said, you really just trust your intuition. You also look at the data and you went for it and you got exactly what you wanted. That's amazing. So, just briefly for our listeners, because I have talked about this in previous episodes, but when they're looking at kind of preparing their business financially, what were the biggest numbers you were looking at? Was it net profit, profit margins, like just a quick snapshot of, what our listeners need to consider when they go to sell their businesses?
yeah. Really, if you think about the entire picture, if there's one number that is the most important when it comes to pricing, it's profit. Annual profit. So how much money is in your pocket at the end of the year? That's really what the sale of a business is based on. And there's a whole bunch of other factors, and growth and all of these other things, but in my opinion, what a buyer is looking at, in how many years will I have paid off this deal if the business keeps going at the same rate that it's going, and that's based on pure profit.
Love that. It's so simple. And
Yeah,
I had mentioned in a previous episode that it's not about the scale of your company. So don't think you need to have 10 locations and 100 therapists. It's what's more important is what is the profitability in your business. You can be a small but mighty and very profitable team, and that is going to be more desirable than the top line, right? Because you
Yeah,
can make
absolutely.
a ton of money, but not be profiting at the end of the year. And so that doesn't benefit anyone.
Yeah, absolutely. I had a very profitable company, and so my company wasn't that big, but we were grossing more than 1 million a year, and we had really good profit margins, and so that helped me to be able to sell for a very, what I felt was a really good price.
Amazing. So now a big question that a lot of people have is, how did you tell your team? What did that look like?
Yes. So, I was very, very close with my team, and I wanted to do this as respectfully as possible. However, I had, people working all over. I had people living in different provinces still working for me. They had moved, but they wanted to continue with the practice. So there was no way we were going to do an in-person meeting. And even to have everyone on a call at the same time, that's almost impossible, right? Everybody has different things going on. And I had decided I was not going to say one word to anybody until the money from the sale was in the bank. And I didn't know what time that was going to happen on the day of the sale, right? Because it's a bit unpredictable in terms of
Mhm.
timing. So what I decided to do was record a Zoom video of me letting them know about the sale and briefly about the reasons from my end. And as soon as the money was in the bank, all the documents were signed, I sent that out to the entire team. And I told them that they could send me a text when they received it and when they were ready to talk about it, and that I would call them as soon as possible after that.
Okay. Thank you for sharing that. And, as much as you're comfortable sharing, what was the response from your team when they got that message?
The response was mixed. There were some people who were, I'm so happy for you, and they all knew about my shift in direction and how I was starting a new company. None of them knew I was going to sell, so that was a surprise to everyone. Some were crying. One person quit immediately. It was a mixed bag. And, one of the things that a friend of mine who is a very trusted business savvy person, she had said to me before the sale, you know, there's no way that we're going to make everyone on your team be happy about this sale. So don't even try to do that. Just communicate it neutrally. Know that, this is right for you. And there was definitely, a week or two of holding space for the team afterward and helping them to process their emotional response to the sale.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. When you shared this with me before, when I was getting ready to sell, your experiences were really comforting for me because that is something I was really afraid of,
Yeah.
was telling the team, letting them down, disappointing them. And I really had to take a step back and remind myself why I was making this decision and why this was really the best situation for me given my life circumstances and future desires. And so I really went into that with just that mindset and also holding space and being compassionate for them regardless of what their feelings were going to be. So thank you for that,
Yes.
Jennie.
Oh, you're very welcome.
So, looking back now, it's been some time. Is there anything you would have done differently?
Well, yes. So, I think there are pros and cons to having your lawyer be your husband.
Yes.
And so Brian joked around that I was one of his worst ever clients because I would argue with him or give him pushback about things, that he would give me advice and I'd, say, well, I don't agree with that. And so looking back, some of the things that I didn't listen to and he told me to do, I should have listened to him. One of them was that he had recommended, so I had a number of buyers who were interested, and he told me, Jennie, have a bidding war, have a fast closing date, whoever wins, wins. And, that's the best way to do it. And at the time I said to him, like, Brian, this isn't, just like any old company. I'm really connected with my staff. I wanted to have the perfect buyer, right? And the person who I felt would be like the best steward of this business. And, looking back, I actually think Brian was correct, because we really don't know how the buyer is going to behave after they buy the practice anyway. They can do their own thing, and that's their prerogative. And so I think I was far too concerned about finding the perfect person, and I actually gave a lot of flexibility for what they wanted, which made the sale process harder on me. One of the things that I did was I said yes to a very long due diligence process. And so that was months and months. And I should have just listened to Brian and made that shorter, and it would have been less risky on my end and less stressful for me.
Thank you. We appreciate just how open you've been about your journey, because I feel like this is going to be really helpful for people who are considering selling their business, and just really what the most important priorities are.
Yes, absolutely.
So now you sell your practice. This era in your career is over. Tell us about the impact this sale had on your identity, like personally and professionally.
Yes, it was quite a shift. I was very, very attached to my identity as the owner of Warden Associates. It was a huge part of who I was, and I think because I'm so passionate about my work, I I spent a ton of time and energy on the business. So then when I stepped away from it and sold, there was a bit of a void space there, that was previously filled with all of this energy and time that I was putting toward that. So it took some time. I thought, oh, this will take a couple months. And then after 6 months, I'm like, yeah, I still feel a little, I'm still kind of getting used to this. It took about a year, I think, to feel kind of more, stabilized and aligned in my new identity. And I'd been evolving a lot in my personal identity, just in my work. I was moving into this different type of work. And so there was a lot of evolution happening. But it was a positive change, but even positive changes require adjustment.
Yes, thank you for sharing. And that's really reassuring to me, having been out of my sale for less than 2 months.
Right.
And really just giving myself that space to feel all my feelings. And in many ways, it feels like a death in my
Oh,
life.
absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I'm a big fan of living in a cyclical way. And so
Mhm.
really the process of kind of letting go of our companies, that is like the winter season, that void season. And that's where there's a lot of, quiet. It looks like nothing's happening, but actually there's a lot of recalibration happening behind the scenes.
It's beautiful, beautiful. So tell us more about the wonderful, incredible work that you're doing now.
Yes. So, after I sold, I actually planned on just doing the mastery paradigm, my signature methodology for leaders. That was my plan. And what ended up happening was word was getting out that I had sold, and I was getting a lot of questions from other group practice owners like, how did you sell? What are the steps? Which I totally understood because I didn't know how to do it either. So I developed a process, and I have a master class on the steps about how to sell your practice. So it's called Practice Potential, the Art of Selling Your Canadian Group Practice. So I've been doing some talks on practice potential, and yeah, I'm selling this master class. And then I offer one-on-one mentorship for people who are looking to sell their practice, because it's one thing to know what the steps are, but it's a very tumultuous process. And so helping people with logistical support and guidance and help with implementing things, and even emotional support from someone who really understands the process. So that's been kind of one piece of what I'm up to. Then, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, you go ahead. I love listening.
So I've always worked quite a bit with therapists. So I was kind of a therapist for therapists. And, I was always falling into, I'm a natural business coach. A lot of my therapists were in private practice or group practice owners. And so they were coming to me for like therapy, but really we were doing business coaching. And I had some people asking me to do business coaching for them, some therapists. So I decided to start a mastermind group called Impeccable, which is a business coaching group for leaders in the psychology world in Canada. So it's mostly group practice owners, but also owners of collective spaces and those who rent space to people, supervisors. So it's to help these therapists to achieve their business goals and also have harmony in their life. So to have a personal life at the same time. So it's definitely not a hustle mentality. It's a very beautiful kind of harmonious type of group. And I'm running the second round of Impeccable right now. And yeah, it's just getting better and better.
Oh my gosh, this is just incredible, Jennie.
Thank you.
The work you're doing, how you support other therapists across Canada and group practice owners, and just being that anchor for them. Like, I really feel like I could have used these services with you. Well, and thank God you were there for me when I was, just needing a bit of encouragement, because it is so much more stressful and emotional of a process than even I anticipated. So thank you for your good work. Now, for our listeners, if they wanted to work with you, they wanted to connect with you, how would they find you?
So you can find me on Instagram. I'm at The Wisdom Portal. Or on LinkedIn, I'm Dr. Jennie Ward, Jennie with an IE. And you can check me out at my website, wisdomportal.ca.
Beautiful. Now, we do like to wrap up episodes when we have amazing guests on, like yourself, with just kind of a word of encouragement, a message that you'd like to give to the group practice owners that are listening today.
Yes. Well, the message that I think is most helpful to hear, it's the message that I really needed to hear when I was starting my journey of selling, which is that it's absolutely possible. Whether it's right now, maybe you're ready right now, or maybe you have to take some steps to get your practice ready to sell, but it's absolutely possible. And it's very beneficial to have support in selling. It doesn't have to be me, but to have, a mentor or a guide who can help you through the process. It would be really, really challenging to do it without that.
Thank you so much, Jennie. It has been such a pleasure and privilege having this conversation with you today. And I know our listeners on the Practice of the Practice podcast are going to walk away with so much value. So thank you again for your time.
Yes, thank you so much for having me, Ashley. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you so much for joining us today for part 6 of our 7-part series. And I look forward to seeing you in our last episode.
We are so excited to bring these types of things to you as much as we can so that you can level up your practice in a way that's just amazing. Head on over to Alma's website, helloalma.com/Joe, if you want help with credentialing, if you want help with reimbursement rates and a guaranteed 2-week payback. Again, that's helloalma.com/Joe. Thank you for letting me into your ears and into your brain. Have a great day. I'll talk to you soon. Special thanks to the band Silence is Sexy for that intro music, and this podcast is designed to provide accurate and authoritative information in regard to the subject matter covered. It is given with the understanding that neither the host, the producers, the publishers, or guests are rendering legal, accounting, clinical, or other professional information. If you want a professional, you should find one.